Welcome to the Close the Chapter podcast. I am Kristen Boyce, a licensed marriage and family therapist with a private practice, Pathways to Healing Counseling. Through conversations, education, strategies, and shared stories, we will be closing the chapter on all the thoughts, feelings, people, and circumstances that don't serve you anymore and open the door to possibilities and the real you. You won't want to miss an episode, so be sure to subscribe. Welcome to this week's Close the Chapter podcast. Have you gone through a betrayal of some kind? Someone has lied to you, cheated on you, hidden information, manipulated you. Perhaps you struggle with pornography or have an unhealthy relationship with sex or have a sex addiction of any kind or have fantasies that are intrusive. This is the podcast for you. I am really excited to talk about this topic and probably will do a many-part series on it because I'm seeing so much of it in our office with betrayal trauma. And I actually had these guests on back in April and it was so good. And guess what? It didn't record. Zoom made an update. I somehow didn't record. It didn't record. And I was just sick about it because it was such a good episode. We went to all the places and I was like, oh my gosh, are they going to come back? Are they not going to come back? Thank God they were willing to come back because it was such a good episode. And we definitely need to do more follow-up episodes. One I think we'll do is on forgiveness and what that looks like and maybe building sexual intimacy that's healthy. But this talks about betrayal trauma specifically. We break it down. We break down their story. So let me introduce you to our guests, Matthew and Joanna Raabsmith, are trained relationship specialists, speakers, and authors of the book, Building True Intimacy, Creating a Connection That Stands the Test of Time. They have over 20 years of combined experience in counseling, coaching, and guiding couples towards healing and transformation. And they co-lead the Raabsmith team, where their mission is to help couples navigate the complexities of relational challenges, particularly in the aftermath of sexual addiction and betrayal trauma. They're also going to be publishing a workbook for couples walking through betrayal trauma. They also have a retreat they're doing in October, and they were just a wealth of knowledge because they've walked through it. She's a marriage and family therapist, and I really think this episode is helpful for those going through betrayals or any kind of porn addiction. So without further ado, I hope this episode is impactful. Share it with your partner, share it with anyone, a friend, family member that might be going through this. Let's start talking about this so people don't have to walk through it alone. Welcome to the Close the Chapter podcast. So I have had Matthew and Joanna on before, and it was like one of the best podcast interviews I've done. And guess what, everyone? It did not record. So they're so generous to come back and have another conversation with me about betrayal trauma. It was so good. It was so powerful. And so thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for coming back.
Oh my God.
Absolutely.
I mean, it was such a great conversation before. We were looking forward to having another one.
I feel like there's a lot of pressure though, because the people listening are like, what was said?
Exactly.
What was so magical? So hopefully we can replicate the experience.
I hope so. Because I actually told clients, I was like, I have a perfect podcast episode, but it didn't record. They're like, oh my gosh. So you're like teasing us with this great conversation and that you didn't even have it recorded. I was like, I know. It was one of those moments. So thank you so much for coming back. I think this is going to equally be as great of a conversation.
Even better.
Yeah.
Even better.
All the fluff will be gone. This is just all good stuff.
The good stuff. Okay, so let's jump in. Let's start with defining betrayal trauma. How do you guys define it?
So betrayal trauma is this term that really was birthed out of this experience that we found so many partners in intimate relationships experience when there is a significant betrayal of trust. And so for the clients that we work with, predominantly that betrayal of trust includes infidelity, sex addiction, right? Lots of hidden behaviors going on. And so when that partner usually has no idea that anything is going on, finds out, has some type of disclosure, and finds out what has actually been going on their entire relationship, it creates a trauma. It is so destabilizing for that individual that it will actually create very similar to PTSD symptoms that you would see in other people who have experienced traumas, because the reality is that they don't know the reality. In a split second, for many of them, their entire world, their understanding of their world is shattered and crumbling around them. Who they thought their spouse was, what they thought their relationship was, who they think that they are, thought that they were. And so much, oftentimes, of their life is built around their understanding of those things, that it truly is everything falling down, crashing down. It's incredibly destabilizing. And so their brain goes into this hyper alert, hyper arousal, feels unsafe all the time, constantly is looking into their environment for other signs that they are unsafe. And they can have intrusive thoughts, they can have anxiety, depression, they can lose their appetite, they can lose sleep, they get, right? So many symptoms go along with this betrayal trauma that is very deep, very intrusive into their life. And then obviously in the relationship, the entire security of that relationship, especially, is shattered. And part of what makes it a trauma is they are so dependent on that relationship. Many times they have stepped into a huge place of vulnerability with that other person. And now that is one of the places that they are most unsafe in their life, the place that they have been the most vulnerable, that they actually leaned into for support and comfort when life is getting hard, is now the thing creating their deepest pain. And so that piece is also very unsettling.
Yeah. And all of us have had an experience of when we thought we knew something was true and then we found out that it wasn't, how destabilizing that can be. But those are usually on much smaller scales, like Joanna is talking about. But even when that happens, you begin to start to question everything. You start to ask yourself, well, if this isn't true, does that mean this is also not true? And this is also not true. And it's this secret keeping and the destabilization of not knowing information, which tends to be the hardest. We're amazed when we sit down with couples, the betrayed spouse, they have lots of concerns around the sexual activity and the infidelity. But usually the greatest pain for them, the greatest hurt is wrapped up in the secrecy, in the lying, in the lack of honesty and transparency in the relationship.
Yeah, that hiding behavior is so triggering because they're like,
Mhm.
how am I ever going to believe anything you've ever
Yeah.
said to me when it's a repeated pattern that you've lied, you've hidden, you've manipulated, you've covered it up?
Yeah. And usually so well that that partner didn't even suspect anything. And so and that is part of what's so destabilizing as well. Then the partner starts to not trust themselves and their own intuition, their gut sense. Like, will I know if my spouse is lying to me or not? Well, I don't know. I don't trust myself to know.
Yeah.
And that can be just as scary.
It's kind of what's happening. One way to think about it, we'll explain it this way, is if you think about your relationship as something you're both pouring into, investing in, it's kind of like if we showed up at the bank every day and we each had an envelope and we believed that there was $5,000 in that envelope and we were investing that in our relationship every day. We kind of looked at each other and we went, here's my envelope, here's your envelope. And we said yes, and we made the deposit. And then maybe 2 years, 5 years, 20 years later, you come back and you realize my partner's envelope was empty. They weren't putting any of the money in. They were watching me pour in that money. They were letting me invest in that relationship, but they were keeping that money for themselves. They were spending it other places. They were doing other things. And that's really what's happening. The idea of the investment that's supposed to be being put into our relationship isn't, but it's not something I know about at the time. And that's where it can feel so hard because of the investment that people have made in the relationship and not had that investment match. That is what is truly that kind of harm and that recognition that it has not been fair between us in the way that we thought and agreed and even said it was going to be fair.
Yeah. So I hear a lot of people say, well, I don't want to look like an idiot. I don't want to look stupid. Let's say they found out, they caught their partner. Okay. They didn't come and disclose it. They were caught. And so anytime there's a familiar pattern, maybe they were traveling and now their partner travels for work. Or maybe they feel like their partner's being a little distant and that's how it felt when there was betrayal. So they're like so afraid that I'm going to look so stupid and not catch this again. And how do I even begin to trust this person when it feels very similar because they're still having to travel for their job? And that's when they had the infidelity, or perhaps they were meeting someone online or whatever. How do we even begin to trust
Well, we
for those
actually
that have been
created a
betrayed?
framework for this very thing. And so our work with couples who've experienced betrayal is built on, it's called the intimacy pyramid. And so that is the framework that we help couples go from this place of discovery. Nothing I thought was real is actually real. All trust, all safety has been broken, but we want a place of intimacy. We want safe connection together. Is that even possible? And so through this framework, we show couples kind of how you actually get there, what the road looks like. And so if you imagine a triangle, kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we have to start at the base, at the foundation of that triangle. And that is in rebuilding honesty. And so long before we ever get to trust or any kind of feelings of security in the relationship again, you have to know your reality. You have to know what you're working with as a couple, what you're rebuilding, what the damage is that has been done. And so getting honest about the past, what actually happened, getting honest about the present, and where is all of that now? How safe is it right now? And what do we have to do to move forward to rebuild? And once there's that transparency, there's the honesty that usually includes a high level of communication. That's when you move to that next level of safety. And safety is about building back in some sense of security and stability into the relationship. And so it's kind of going, okay, honesty is what is the wreckage that was done? Safety is, okay, are we going to do the things to rebuild? And usually it is the betraying spouse going to do the things to rebuild and demonstrate that they are indeed safe. And so demonstrating things like self-regulation, being able to take responsibility for themselves, their emotions, demonstrating that when they have tough emotions, they're not going to act out destructively anymore, but they're learning ways to regulate that are safe for themselves, safe for the relationship.
Yeah. And one of the ways you can think about this is that it is that rebalancing, like I talked about. If you can imagine, I've been showing up as the betraying spouse and not putting into the relationship. I got to start showing up and putting in. But to do that, I got to figure out why I was showing up and pretending there was money in my envelope, because I've fooled myself into thinking that I'm all in. And so a lot of times when someone is dealing with sexual addiction, with problematic sexual behavior, in their mind, they think, hey, I'm doing the best that I can, but they're not actually being real, becoming aware. And so one of the things we talk about is an honest person, you have to be an aware person. And so the really initial work for that betraying spouse is I got to get to know myself so that I can then be honest with this other person. I've got to understand, why did I act out on work trips? Why were things different when I traveled? What is it about a week that's stressful that makes me want to go to my addiction, maybe drink more alcohol or work late hours and put myself in danger? Because if I don't know those things, then my partner's going to be sitting here with that reality of they're about to board a plane and go to an environment that I know is unsafe for them, and they have no idea what to do about it. And so to build trust means I become aware of what I do, why I do it, and then I do the work to change. And that's going to be both internal and external. A lot of external are boundaries. I learned to say no to things that I don't have to say yes to. A lot of people say yes to things that they could say no to and go. I've worked with a lot of men who've said no to their jobs. No, I won't take that trip. No, I won't drink with that client. No, I won't. And they still keep their jobs and they're still successful and they do the things that they need to do. But there's also that internal work of going, hey, what is the really kind of pain, the trauma actually inside of me, which is driving this behavior? What's really interesting about betrayal trauma is it's usually matched by the betraying spouse having their own trauma, usually from childhood, from unresolved family systems. I'm carrying in this unresolved trauma. That's why I created the infidelity. That's why I was stuck in the addiction. And so my ability to be honest about that and deal with it, that's really what restores that honesty and safety, which is where couples start to experience kind of trust being reformed. And that's that next level, right? Honesty allows me to say what it is. Safety means I'm dealing with it. And trust is that I've dealt with it so consistently that my partner can go, I know you have an issue. I know you have a struggle, but I know that you're dealing with it. And that's really when things start to move forward. Where things bog down is even if I can name my struggle, but I don't deal with it, my partner's going to go, yeah, that doesn't feel better. That it almost can feel worse. Like, great, you've named it, but are you actually dealing with it? And so a lot of times betrayed partners can get wrapped up into the system and they can feel like, hey, my job is to make sure my spouse is doing their work. They're going to their meetings, they're seeing their counselors, they're getting better, which sounds right. Like, it sounds like, oh, that's really helpful. But then it creates this kind of enmeshed kind of parenting relationship where this betrayed spouse is kind of taking care of the other person and they're not actually experiencing the safety and trust that they wish they had.
Which is recreating the same issue. Because if it's a parent-child dynamic, which we kind of talked about on our first interview together, then who really wants to be intimate with their parent or their child? So actually recreating the same dance that they probably had before, but now it's really reinforcing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when someone's stepping out of the relationship into addiction, then the other person has to step up and kind of be the parent and care for the relationship and care for the other things that are responsible for in that relationship. Sometimes they make kids, things like that. And if when that person steps into the relationship, if it's still in this one down position where they're now in recovery, but they're still disempowered, they're not taking responsibility, they're not becoming safe of their own accord. It creates a new unsafe imbalance that neither of those people like, right? The partner ends up still feeling unsafe, even though, but what it can lure them in though, because it feels less unsafe. And I think that's where a lot of couples get trapped, right? It feels less unsafe than the craziness that was going on. So, okay, I guess we'll settle for that. And in the same way, right, for the betraying spouse, they don't have to take on more responsibility. And so that's kind of comfortable. Other people are still running the program for them, things like that. But eventually, you see the resentment start to build because what we don't like is to be disempowered. And so slowly that resentment starts to build. They start to see the betrayed spouse as, we will call it, kind of the perpetrator. If you think of there's kind of different roles you can play in relationship, that drama triangle talks about perpetrator, victim, and rescuer. And so all of a sudden they start seeing that betrayed spouse as the perpetrator. They're controlling, right? Things like that. And all of a sudden you just have this new, extremely toxic dynamic in the relationship that you will never build any trust, vulnerability, or intimacy in that kind of a space.
Yeah. And I think what's tricky about these situations is with sexual addiction and sexual infidelity, it doesn't carry some of the same kind of markers as people who struggle with substance abuse, because substance abuse often tends to erode the kind of security of life. If I'm really struggling with a heavy drug addiction or heavy alcoholism, it's typically impacting a number of different things. Like, it might be impacting my work, my ability to hold down a job. And so I'm very destabilized, and it's kind of obvious. But with sexual addiction, I can be I can look very stable. We can look very stable as a couple, but we're actually really unstable. I'm not doing well. And one of the ways that it shows up is a lot of kind of emotional abandonment. The betrayed spouse is carrying all the emotional load, but that's such a kind of invisible thing for many people on the outside. So what they will see is they may see, hey, this betraying spouse is going to work, they're making money, they're successful, they're doing all the things they're supposed to do. And so it's difficult for those on the outside and even inside of the relationship to feel like, wait, are we really that unstable? It feels like we're just fine. But it isn't until the kind of pieces started getting pulled and couples start to say, wait, what are we really looking for, that it starts to show up, that these kind of gaps start to show up. And that's why these things can go on for so long until they are discovered, right? Until they're caught and found. And so many times this system has been at play in relationships. Like I said, 5, 10, we've seen couples 35 years. This system's been in place and they've not realized that.
Yeah. And what I see is, so for some that have the sex addiction, let's hear your story and then how you've recovered so we can give a real life example where the addictive partner, okay, they continue with the behavior. Then they've got to be on their good behavior, right? Okay, so I got caught. So now I'm going to be on my good behavior and I'll do all the things. And then we'll get back in good graces. And then I kind of feel like I'm getting resentful because now I've hustled and I've done it and it's never good enough because you're still upset. And so they go back to the addiction, the sexual addiction or sexual acting out or whatever. So let's talk through that. and your
Yeah.
story woven in on kind of how you guys have worked
Yeah.
through this.
Yeah, and this was a challenge for us even. And so a little bit of background. So Joanna and I started dating and got married pretty quickly, but had a really true sense of like being pulled together and kind of like we felt like that there was something about who we were as a couple that really was special. And so we started this journey and we wanted a great marriage. We had no idea what it looked like to build one. And so we would just buy books and courses and anything we could to try to learn. And along the way, we found some things that were incredibly helpful in understanding ourselves. I think really foundational and really helped us to understand kind of what we feel and think and believe and what we do and that how that affects everything, both personally and relationally. And that helped us in a lot of ways bring a lot of growth, kind of some individual and even relationally. But we still kept getting stuck. We just felt like there was a limit to our closeness, to our intimacy.
Yeah, well, I would fade in, right? Move towards those goals that we both named verbally that we want in our relationship. We want this closeness, this intimacy, this secure attachment. We want to be on the same team. When I would lean in, Matthew wouldn't reciprocate. Or sometimes he would, and then a lot of times he wouldn't. And it would maybe be a withdrawal, a shutdown, I'm tired. Sometimes it would be angry, defensive. And I would just get these reactions that didn't line up with who we said we wanted to be. And I had no idea why or what was happening until it was actually the very first week, 2 weeks of my MFT program in grad school. I was in a class called Shame and Guilt. And at the part of that class, there was an anonymous man who came and shared his story, healing, personal healing, and kind of sobriety, recovery from sex addiction as well as relational restoration, what that process had looked like for him. And as he was describing his journey and especially the relational aspects of it, I just knew in that moment, okay, that's it. This is the thing. He is describing our relationship to a T. That has to be what is happening. And so I went home that day. I confronted Matthew. Like you said, I found out, but just asked him point blank, is this happening? Is this what is keeping us stuck in our relationship?
And for years, I lied to Joanna when she would ask me that question or intimate about it, right? It was rarely ever direct, but anytime we got close to it, I was very good at hiding and pushing it away, often putting it back on her, right? Sometimes even getting angry and defensive. And that had been my MO for all of our relationship. It had also been my MO for all of my life. I did that with everybody. No one knew about my sexual addiction. They knew nothing about what was really going on in this really compartmentalized part of my life. But I had also come to a realization shortly before that that it was really a cancer, that I was starting to see how it was eroding our relationship, how it was really killing kind of the joy that I had in my life. I was really getting to kind of the end of myself, as we talk about in recovery circles. And I can remember even just being like, if there's a way out of this, if there's a path, I'll take it. And so when she laid this story out in front of me, it felt like a prayer had been answered. And I was like, I blurred out, yes. She says, are you dealing with this? I'm like, yes. And then it was like, get it back in my mouth. Let's not talk about that. And Joanna, I think so perfectly just handed me the sheet of paper and she was like, if you want to walk it, here you go. And kind of gave me an opportunity. And early on, it was pretty good. I think I am one of those people who shame motivates me to start performing and being the good guy. And so I did that and that worked at first. And it got me kind of motivated to go to the intensives. And I did learn a lot about myself. I started learning a lot about addiction. And that really helped us. And especially early on, because I was super motivated. But those pieces of that kind of shame based motivation would tend to show up anytime Joanna wanted to talk about what had happened between us. We weren't talking about our future and moving forward and everything that was going to be good and great, that shame. And then I would get defensive and I would start to be like, hey, why don't you just forgive me? Why don't we just move on? Why are you keeping? And so any pain, any impact that Joanna got honest about, I would not handle well.
And I think it's partly, we see this with other couples as well as I think our own story. Couples enter this space, they're not experts in what this journey looks like. They don't know what to expect. And so there's kind of this assumption of like, okay, the destructive thing, the sex addiction that caused all the pain and betrayal, we just need to take care of that and then we'll be good. Right. And so all this effort and work goes into getting sober, having good recovery, And it may not even be from a performance place. It may be, honestly, like their own values and goals driving it.
Yeah.
But then the resentment starts to come when they realize, oh, just healing that doesn't mean all of a sudden the relationship is okay. You mean I have to do a whole nother layer of work to repair the relational damage? I was not expecting that. And I'm not ready for that. And I see a lot of times that resentment kicking in when it's time to start that process.
Yeah.
I think it is sometimes just like, ooh, those expectations were not aligned or we're not aware of that.
Because I feel like I had gotten to that place where I really started to own my own recovery. Like my recovery really was about me. And I think that helped. And that helped me to stay sober and to build my sobriety.
Yeah.
And I knew what I wanted for myself. But I think like Joanna was saying, but I thought that was going to be it. I thought that was going to be the end of the story. And that once we got to trust, we were done.
Yeah.
And that like, hey, you trust me again. We can be apart. You don't have to worry about like everything all the time. And we just realized like that's not the level of relationship we wanted. And Joanna was pushing for more. And what she was pushing for was vulnerability. And that's actually what's above that level of trust is that you can be partners with people. You can have a relationship where you say, hey, I trust you're not going to hurt me. You trust I'm not going to hurt you. It doesn't mean that you're intimate. And what Joanna was inviting us into, I didn't know it at the time, was she was inviting us into intimacy through vulnerability. She was saying, hey, I trust you, but I need to be able to know that I can trust you with what hurt, with our story, that we can hold all of our story at one time. Because what I wanted to do is I only wanted to hold the future story, the story where everything was good and everything was great and everything was redeemed. And she was like, I'm living this reality where for years in our relationship, I didn't understand what was going on. And you did, right? This imbalance of power and safety.
Share reality. And so when he was only living in the future and what we can be and what we can't create, but wasn't willing to hold the reality of our past, there was no possibility for intimacy in that way.
And so we spun for a long time around that. And we would continue to try to move into that place. And it really wasn't until I got to that place of not only am I going to own my recovery, but I'm going to own our story. I'm going to own the reality that I did betray her. I'm going to own the reality that I wasn't someone who was putting in the relationship, that I was showing up with that empty envelope every week. I'm going to own that. And what was amazing is that as I began to kind of accept that reality, accept that story, I actually started to feel different. Like I started to feel different. Like I noticed there was less shame, there was less weight over me. And then we were able to go places that we never were able to go before. We were able to have conversations and connection. And then all of a sudden, it wasn't just that we were two people kind of sharing a life. We really started to feel like one. We really started to feel like the thing we envisioned from the very beginning is really what we're becoming. And that's that intimacy. And what we noticed is like we were passionate about our relationship again. We were excited about like who we were. We also had a sense of purpose to it. We had a sense of like, hey, there's a reason we exist. There's a reason our relationship is what it is. And we also learned how to play and have fun again, to be like relaxed with each other and for not everything to be kind of heavy and serious. Those were the signs for us that we were in that place of intimacy.
So I can hear the audience go, well, how long did that take? Right? Because people
2
are like,
weeks,
well,
right?
Yeah, yeah. I feel like it's like people want drive-through therapy, like just supersize me and move on, right? They don't realize that this is layer upon layer upon layer. Like,
Yes.
I'll give multiple answers. It's obviously so hard to answer. The first answer is it never stops. We realize that if we want the kind of intimacy that we say we want, we are doing work on our relationship till the day we die. And there's always room for growth. And yes, there were some significant moments along the journey where we could tell we have a wholly different relationship than we ever had before. Back in a couples group that we pulled together and led, we called it Marriage 2.0, right? And the understanding was we are all living radically different relationships than we had before. 2 years in was a pretty significant marker where I felt like trust was significantly rebuilt and we're in us that I can actually step into thinking about a future together. Because for a long time in recovery, I was just kind of waiting to see what I didn't know if our relationship was going to work out or not. It really depended on what Matthew chose to do. So that was kind of a 2-year period of kind of waiting and seeing and watching the safety and the trustworthiness grow before I was like, okay, no, he's serious. We're really creating something new. I can step back in and we can talk about us. We can talk about future together. And then it was probably several years after that, there was really this sense, almost like a freedom from the past story. That's maybe how I would describe it. For a lot of times, it felt like our story created this like shadow or cloud over us of like, okay, we will never be what we could have been without this part of our story. And this is always going to hold us back in some way from who we want to be. And there was this big question of like, is that just the best couples can hope for who've experienced betrayal? And I truly did wonder that. And so it was probably several years after that first point where we realized, no, we don't have to have that cloud. We can embrace our story. We can accept the reality of our story, not just accept it, but embrace it as something that has made us stronger, that has made us more connected, that has created the secure attachment that we've always wanted because we walked through that. Now, it's not a path we would ever recommend to someone if they said, hey, I want a secure attachment. Okay, well, don't go that route. But it is absolutely possible. They even have a term for it, earned secure attachment. And it's absolutely possible to create that kind of relationship after betrayal.
And one of the big things that motivated us to do this work at this level was because it did take us longer than we wanted it to take. We felt like we were kind of wandering in the desert because there weren't a lot of resources for couples. There's a lot of resources for me because sexual addiction had really come forward as a field. And so there are a lot of avenues for kind of my healing. Joanna was really forging a lot of that. And betrayal trauma was very new on the scene. Luckily, she was able to find some really good resources and to get some of that clarity. But there was almost none for couples. And what there was kind of a good luck. If you can both get through this, you may be okay. And so we really wanted to devote the work of the intimacy pyramid to be about how do we help couples get through this process quicker? Not shortcuts, not things where they're skipping over parts of the process, but also so they're not wandering. I think if I would have been able to get hold of that internal security and that internal strength earlier, Joanna and I could have done, I think, some of that deeper healing work much more efficiently and effectively. Mm-hmm. And it was that process that really kind of drew things out. And so that's a lot of when I'm working with the guys that I'm working with is, yes, we're going to deal with the sexual addiction, but we're going to deal with that, with your ability to be emotionally present, to be vulnerable with pain. Everybody thinks is life will be good when I have no pain. That's the mistake. Life will be good when I can handle being around emotional discomfort, when I can be around emotional pain. That's when life gets really good because that opens me up to a broader spectrum of emotional experience. Yes, I will feel the pain of the losses that we carried because of my action, but I also now get to truly enjoy the fruit of the labor that we put in, the kind of relationship that we cultivate.
So what do you say, because I can hear clients in my head, when they want to blame their partner, let's say the sexual addiction partner wants to blame the partner, like if we just had more sex, if you wouldn't nag me, if you wouldn't be my mom, if you wouldn't do this, if you would just come on to me instead of me always having to initiate, then this wouldn't have happened or this would be better. And so talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I hear that a lot in my work. And I just let them know, like, if you have been able to solve a problem by changing someone else, then please write a book about that. There's just no evidence that it works. Externalizing your issues is actually the most disempowering thing that you can do. And we work with both sides of the equation about this because you can hear this from betrayed spouses too, right? Where it's like, I'm going to put all of it on the other person. And it makes sense. There are things in this world that are broken, that aren't the way they're supposed to be, right? They're not as good as they can be. So any of us can sit down and point the finger. It's not hard. The hard work is being able to avoid the shame finger, because what a lot of people will do is they'll blame someone else, but then they'll start shaming themselves. They'll start kind of beating themselves up, and that's not any better. The better thing to be able to do is to be able to slow down and go, really, what's going on underneath? And the only reason we blame is because we're feeling things about our sense of identity or our sense of safety. And there are things that are hard to feel. They're things we've been feeling for a really, really long time without resolution. And we think that by blaming others, we'll feel better, but we just don't. It's like Advil. It'll make that pain drop a little bit and go away. I've got the same issue in my body. And so helping people realize like dealing with the underlying pain, the underlying emotion is going to be the thing that frees you. And it's actually going to be the thing that frees you from other people's brokenness. Because if there are things that are true, like, hey, this would be better if this wasn't there, you being able to deal with you will actually give you a better chance of actually doing. You pointing the finger just leave you in that system longer.
Personally, around those acting out behaviors, those destructive choices they did make, they're realizing it wasn't about the sex.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
It was about what I thought the sex got me, which again is that emotional discomfort or pain or identity issue that I didn't know how to solve in a healthy way. And so I went out there for the sex, right? So all of a sudden, if I go, oh, it wasn't about the sex, then my spouse having more sex with me wouldn't have solved the issue. They just would have become my new addiction. And that's not any better. That's not going to create life-giving intimacy, life-giving sex in that relationship. It will be an abusive use of your partner's body to satisfy that addiction, which is not what we are going for at all. And so helping them understand you're acting out in that addiction, out of the emotional discomfort, is very different than the kind of relationship and sexual relationship that's going to be healthy and life-giving. So you have to kind of separate those and start to learn about the difference. So as you step into re-engage sexually, you're building it in a healthy way.
Let's talk about codependency and preoccupation, what the addictive partner is doing. Okay. Like checking phones, checking behaviors, preoccupation, rumination, looping thoughts, anxiety. Let's talk about that and how the betrayed partner heals that. We think I'll feel better if I know exactly what the partner is doing at all times.
Right.
Yep.
It's so scary, right? We talked about the betrayal trauma earlier and how unsettling it is, how it creates, right? A lot of those are actual trauma symptoms. If you go in the DSM and you read about PTSD, right? You'll see a lot of those. And so basically what that betrayed spouse's body is doing is it's saying, you are unsafe. And so you need to engage in behaviors that will create safety for you. And one of the things our body loves to try and do to create safety is control. That is one of the favorite coping behaviors. It says, if I just know everything, and knowledge is a form of control, it's a form of power. If I know every little detail, if I know everything that's happening, then I will feel more safe. And ultimately, the coping of control is an unrealistic way to make you safe, or depending on that only, because we don't have full control in this world and so going, okay, in the same way, I want to learn to cope with the emotional discomfort that I am now feeling, this lack of safety in my relationship, in my environment. I have to learn what are the steps that I can take to heal the trauma that has impacted my brain. And so what's so crazy is that trauma actually changes the way your brain functions. But because of this beautiful thing called neuroplasticity, we can retrain our brain to function in more secure ways. And so going, okay, what are the resources that I need for my own healing journey? What are the things that are going to help my brain that's experienced this trauma start to heal so I feel the need, that hypervigilance, kind of that need, it goes down. I feel it less. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't use my voice assertively in the relationship to name my needs, to set boundaries, to hold accountability standards for transparency. But the way we like to see it with couples is going, okay, that betrayed spouse gets to be assertive and name their needs. And then gets to wait and see if the betrayed spouse is willing to step in and honor those needs, right? It shouldn't be you digging around to find information. That betrayed spouse should be offering that information if they are truly becoming honest and transparent. And if they're not offering that information, you have what you need to make decisions about your relationship. At the point where the only way you can get information is through hunting and searching, that's probably not the dynamic you're wanting to build in your relationship anyways. And so kind of doing some kind of deeper work around those kind of values, like what kind of relationship you want. What does it look like for you to show up in that kind of relationship in a way that honors your own boundaries and questions like that?
Yeah, and we see this a lot in the couples that are struggling is they think that it's all about the what. What are we supposed to do? Okay, we're supposed to have transparency. Or the addict spouse is going, oh, I'm supposed to go to a group and I have to get a chip. And those what's matter, but it's the how that's usually the thing that makes the difference. And so instead of going, we need transparency, but we need to make sure that transparency flows the right way. It flows from the person who has information freely given rather than pulled from them by this person who wants all of it. In the same way, like I go to my 12-step meetings, not because it's the what, how do I engage my recovery? Is my recovery life-giving for me? Is it producing in me a life I wouldn't have if I ignored it? I love my recovery because it's given me the best life I've ever lived, not because I checked a bunch of boxes. If it's the box checking, even if I'm doing the right thing, we'll have worse relational outcomes. And this is what we kind of see the dynamic is they'll come to us and they say, hey, we did everything. We did everything you told us to do. And we're like, how do y'all feel about it? We feel horrible. I don't trust him. I don't think she likes me in this kind of dynamic because they're not focusing on the how do we do this? How do we sit down and do this well in a way that actually shapes healthier connection?
Yeah, that's what I see. Checked all the boxes and I still don't trust him. Or I still feel like you're parenting me. Or I still feel like you're controlling. Or it's like the same cycle. And then we'll see relapse. The guy's like, you're so controlling. Now I'm going to hide and do this on the side. And it feels like we haven't made a lot of progress.
Yeah. And we've even seen this around things like empathy and emotional, like even these things can be check boxes.
Yes.
Like, okay, I'm going to show up empathetic for you. So I'm going to look at you and I'm going to say the empathy script I was given.
Oh, right? I have that where they'll go and I'm just doing this and I'm reading the script.
Yeah. And we'll turn and we'll ask the wife. Usually we'll say, how did that feel? And she'll be like, not great. I mean, I guess it's better than him yelling at me. That's what they'll say. Like,
about the bad they were getting before, but it's still not good. And it's still not going to help them move towards the relationship they want. And where it's nice and helpful to have some clear steps, realizing, but their steps are only as good as the deeper change that they are creating inside of the person. And that's not a checkbox. That's not right. So we might have to redo some of those steps you've already done because they didn't create the deeper change that was needed to actually move on.
Yeah. I find that willingness is a key ingredient.
Yeah.
If you don't have a willingness to look within, own your stuff, do the deeper work, look at your childhood, sexual abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse, like what was there? What was a violation of you? What were you not seen and heard? What you felt less than? You've never felt good enough. Like if we're not willing to do that, it's hard to repair. Do you feel that is true?
Oh, absolutely. And I have sensitivities for those who are unwilling because they are typically trapped in their pain. And I tell people all the time, like, yes, when I confessed to Joanna, that became my sobriety date and it has stayed my sobriety date by the grace of God. But I also had a lot of times before that where I said I was going to stop, where I said I was done, but I wasn't willing. I really wasn't willing to give it all because I was convinced that I would lose everything, that I would have no one, I would have nothing. And so I know that people are out there wanting something different, but they're stuck in that loop that they've been a part of for long enough to go, well, but this is the safest I can hope for, right? This is the best I can hope for because something better isn't out there. And I think something that we've been really passionate about is telling our story because there is better out there. And one of the things we love is when we work with couples long enough, we often have them learn to tell their story because it is so incredibly helpful to know, there is better out there. The work is worth it. Because a lot of people get stuck in that lie that this is as good as it gets. And they stay that way for a long time. They kind of survive. And we talk about like, do you want to survive or do you want to thrive? If you want to thrive, you're going to have to do some work that you've put off for a long time, right? It's been sitting there. It's been waiting for you. There's dust on that, right? But you're going to have to dust it off and get to it. But I guarantee you, if you do, what you're going to find on the other side, you're going to be like, oh, why didn't I start this work sooner? Why didn't I find this even earlier in my life? Because it has brought the kind of life that I want.
I love the saying, do you want to be bitter or do you want to be better? One of my therapists said that
That's
once. And I was like,
great.
I love that. Do you want to be bitter or do you want to be better? That's really what can happen.
Yeah.
It's up to you. I could talk to you guys for hours because this is such an important topic that isn't talked about enough. So I love that you're doing this work. What book recommendations besides yours do you have for folks that are on this journey?
Yes. I mean, one of the ones I first read is Betrayal Trauma, Your Sexually Addicted Spouse by Barbara Steffens. And so she kind of pioneered a lot of the research around betrayal trauma. Just a great intro to understand what is going on, right? Like, what am I going through? What is this experience that's been thrust upon me for most people, right? And you don't choose this journey. And so understanding kind of both what you're going through as well as kind of relationally the meaning of this experience. I think that's a great one.
A new resource that just came out, wasn't available when I was going through, but I wish it was. It's a workbook called Finding the Way Through by some colleagues of ours, Jeannie Vitoni and Tim Stein. And it's for addicts in recovery, but it's written specifically with betrayal trauma sensitivity in mind. So I think the first approach was kind of, you're going to go do your thing, almost like you live in a different world and bubble. But the problem is that's actually how I lived in my addiction. I had a very compartmentalized life. And Tim and Jeannie, I think, have done a great job of bringing recovery into the relationship where, hey, if you're going to do that deeper work, if you're going to go deeper to find those underlying realities, you also need to know you're still married. You're still a parent, probably. You still got a job. There's going to be realities that you're still responsible for. And part of that is going to be a wounded partner, a partner who is hurting, who's in their own recovery. And so how do you do recovery well in light of what else is going on in your life? I think they just do a great job of laying that out.
And then we have hopefully coming out at the end of June, a workbook specifically for couples in recovery to walk through the intimacy pyramid with kind of explanations as well and very practical like resources, tools, exercises for them to utilize. And so we're very excited about that.
What's it going to be called? Do you have a title for the workbook or no? Or you can't disclose?
I can't remember it exactly.
I get that.
Land on.
Dan will kill us because he's like, guys, we went over this.
It's
we'll
okay. It's okay. Because what we'll do.
I don't want to misname it. And
I know. I hear you. And then they're like, wait, I was searching on Amazon. I can't find it. We'll link your website in the show notes. Where can people find you if they're interested in your retreat, working with you? Where can they find your book?
Absolutely. Very easy. Raabsmithteam.com is where you're going to find everything and anything you need to know about our work, our resources. It's a great way to connect. One of the things we love to do is we love to equip couples with resources that we've created and used in our own practice. And so if they go to raabsmithteam.com/free, we have a check-in that we created that is so vital for building that foundational level of honesty in the relationship. What's cool is if they've experienced betrayal or not, the resource works because it just creates a really healthy connection point on a day-to-day basis. And there's a little 30-day guide that kind of gets them going, gets them incorporating it in their life. So they can go there and find out some more information and hopefully find a tool that'll create some greater connection in their relationship in a really short amount of time.
Fantastic. We'll link that in the show notes too.
Perfect.
Anything we did not talk about that you feel like is really important to cover?
Yeah. I think the reminder to people that recovery is a relational thing. I think a lot of people have in mind that these are two separate worlds because they're very different. What an addict is going through versus a betrayed spouse is going through is very different. But I think if we focus on the differences rather than focus on, hey, there is still an us here that we're working on, that we're rebuilding, that we're restoring, I think that really changes the game. And so I think just encouraging people to remember that relational side of things, even as you're doing the deeper individual work.
And I think also we do a lot of talking about large concepts, big journeys in a short amount of time. And so remembering this is a marathon, not a sprint. And true transformation will be built in small moments, consistent steps you take every day that may not feel significant day to day or even week to week, but over the months and the years, it's going to create dramatic transformation in your life and in a relationship. And so not forgetting to focus on consistent little changes that sometimes feels a little bit more manageable, more doable to kind of take that on versus if you think about the entire journey as an intimacy therapist, that can feel very daunting. So going, okay, those little moments also.
Yes. Thank you so much for your willingness to come back. It was a wonderful conversation.
Absolutely.
It was equally as great as the other one. So thank you both so much. I encourage everyone to grab the book, grab the resources. You do have a retreat coming up, I think in October. Is that right?
We do, yes. It's
That
gonna
I've
be a lot of
recommended
fun.
for folks.
Yeah.
Everybody in this situation, I believe, needs individual work and couples work. And
Yeah.
there is going to be a lot of repetition in building trust. So we're going to talk about the disclosure. We're going to be at multiple times, oftentimes.
Yep.
So I want to normalize that this isn't just a one-off conversation and then we move on. Like you've
Yeah.
said, it's going to be a long haul of your willingness to reflect, get curious, and put in the work and understand there will be a lot of repetition. And that's how we heal.
Yeah.
Through consistency, through some repetition. So I want to make sure anybody going through this know that's part of the journey because some people are like, do other people go through this? And that's the great part about what you guys do because you can be like, yes, this is part of how we recover. So thank you for the work you're doing. It's super important. I especially think in this world today, we need it now more than ever, what you guys are doing. Truly.
Appreciate it.
So thank you
Appreciate
so
it.
much for coming back and just doing this times two.
Well worth it.
Yeah, appreciate you. Thank you so much for listening to the Close the Chapter podcast. My hope is that you took home some actionable steps along with motivation, inspiration, and hope for making sustainable change in your life. If you enjoyed this episode, click the subscribe button to be sure to get the updated episodes every week and share with a friend or a family member. For more information about how to get connected, visit Kristen, Kristen, Boyce, BOICE.com. Thanks and have a great day.